Hello and welcome to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast. If you'd like to become a patron of the podcast, we would love you to. And you can do so at patreon.com/the History Network. Thanks to all our patrons who make this podcast possible. The HistoryNetwork.org podcast, season 35, episode 5, A Ruse Gone Wrong, the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. This episode was written by Murray Darm. Murray is an ancient and medieval military historian from New Zealand living in Australia. He has written more than 100 articles on various aspects of ancient and medieval military history, as well as other historical topics from all periods, ranging from the history of opera to the runic alphabet and recipients of the Victoria Cross. He is the author of Macedonian Phalangite versus Persian Warrior, Athenian Hoplite versus Spartan Hoplite, and Leuctra 371 BC, all from Osprey Publishing. He is, of course, a regular writer on here and a regular on the Ancient Warfare podcast. In late October AD 312, the fate of the future of the Roman world was decided near the Pons Milvius, the Milvian Bridge, the modern Ponte Milvio, Italy, crossing the River Tiber some 5 kilometres north of Rome on the Via Flaminia. The battle was the culmination of the war between rival Roman emperors Maxentius and Constantine to see who would dominate the Western Roman Empire. The victory of Constantine at the Milvian Bridge has been presented as a straightforward rout of Maxentius's numerically superior forces. It has also been presented as a victory of Christianity. Both of these perspectives are flawed. The battle was far more complex than has previously been considered. In AD 293, the Emperor Diocletian had introduced a system of 2 emperors, Augusti, singular Augustus, and 2 junior emperors, Caesares, singular Caesar, to govern what had become an unstable system of one emperor ruling over the entire Roman Empire. The previous century had seen a great deal of instability in more than 50 emperors and usurpers. This new system was known as the Tetrarchy and saw the empire split between East and West. The West governed from Mediolanum, modern Milan, Italy, and Augusta Treverorum, modern Trier, Germany. The East from Nicomedia, modern Izmit, Turkey, and Sirmium, modern Sremska Mitrovica, near Belgrade, Serbia. The system worked well until 305, when Diocletian and his co-emperor Maximian retired, and the Caesares, Galerius, and Constantius were raised to Augusti, and new Caesares were appointed, Maximinus Daza to Galerius, and Valerius Severus to Constantius. Constantius died in York in July 306, however, and his son, Flavius Valerius Constantius, known as Constantine, was acclaimed Augustus by his father's army. Constantius's co-emperor Galerius, however, promoted Severus to Augustus as the system dictated. In October that year, the retired emperor Maximian's son Marcus Aurelius Valerius Maxentius declared himself Augustus in opposition to Severus. Rivalry and ambition had already put the Tetrarchy, a system, at risk. Maxentius had probably expected to succeed his father, but in this he was disappointed. He would, however, prove to be popular with the troops as his father's son. Both Maxentius and Constantine had had military careers which would prove immensely useful to their imperial claims. Aurelius Victor claims Maxentius was a coward, but this seems unlikely. Severus, sent to defeat Maxentius by Galerius, suffered the ignominy of his army deserting to his enemy, and he surrendered to Maxentius in 307. He was later murdered. Galerius marched on Rome himself, but he too was unsuccessful. Both Maxentius and Constantine were therefore recognized as Augusti. A crisis meeting to avoid further civil war was held in Carnuntum, near modern Petronell, Carnuntum and Bad Deutsch-Altenburg, Austria, in 308. There it was declared that Licinius would be Augustus of the West, with Constantine as his Caesar. Galerius would be Augustus of the East, with Maximinus continuing as his Caesar. Maxentius was declared a usurper. This arrangement lasted no longer than the meeting. Maxentius had seized control of Italy and Africa, and neither Constantine nor Maximinus were willing to tolerate the less experienced Licinius being promoted to Augustus over them. Civil war blossomed. By 309 all 4 candidates were declared Augusti. The retired emperor Maximian, who still held ambitions to be restored to power, was forced to commit suicide in 310. In April 311 Galerius died of natural causes, and his death saw a race to secure his power base. While Licinius and Maximinus competed in the east, in the west Constantine was free to march on Italy, Maxentius's stronghold. This was despite the fact that the 2 men were brothers-in-law. Constantine had married Maxentius's sister Fausta. According to the historian Entropius, Constantine's reasons for invading were because he sought to reunite the empire under his sole rule. The territory controlled by Constantine included Britain, Spain, Gaul, and Germany. Maxentius controlled Italy and Africa and several of the islands of the western Mediterranean, controlling of the fleets at Misenum and Ravenna. In late 311 and early 312, Constantine was on the Rhine frontier. There he raised an army of 40,000 men, according to the contemporary anonymous panegyric written in 313. Other historians, like the 6th century Zosimus, make his force much larger at 98,000 men. It may have seemed that Constantine was preparing for a campaign against the German tribes, but he was in reality preparing his army to invade Italy. Maxentius did not take the war to Constantine, but awaited his coming, possibly because he also feared attack by Licinius if he moved north. Control of Italy was still a vital propaganda tool, and to lose it would be to lose everything. And although it was no longer the capital of the empire, the city of Rome itself was hugely symbolic. Controlling it went a long way to justifying claims of imperial power. Maxentius's status as a usurper also helped Constantine wage a just war to oust him from Italy. In spring 312, Constantine marched his forces south and invaded northern Italy. Awaiting him, Maxentius had raised 100,000 men, according to the panegyric. Again, Zosimus makes his figure much larger, 188,000 men. Crossing the Cottian Alps, an unlikely route into Italy from the Rhine, and one which therefore took Maxentius by surprise, Constantine took Seducio, modern Susa, Italy, claiming he was liberating the city from the tyranny of Maxentius. Maxentius's main force was in the east, at Verona. Constantine marched on Augusta Taurinorum, modern Turin, and then Verona, and defeated 2 armies commanded by Maxentius's subordinates. Constantine showed himself a brilliant strategist, and he inspired his men leading from the front. At Turin he completely destroyed Maxentius's heaviest cavalry. There were other Maxentian strongholds in the north, such as Aquileia, and Constantine probably took the time to secure their surrender. The only secured date for the campaign is the Battle of the Milvian Bridge at the end of October, and so the remainder of spring and summer must have been spent securing towns as he progressed towards his ultimate destination, Rome. It was also not in Constantine's interests to leave a Maxentian stronghold untaken in his rear and along his line of possible retreat. Constantine marched from Venetia down towards Rome, crossing the Apennines, using the direct route, the Via Flaminia, on which the Milvian Bridge sat. Towns needed to be taken on the route, and there is evidence of some resistance, although it was seemingly insubstantial. There is reason to believe it was not a walkover, however, and some towns may have delayed the march or caused setbacks to Constantine's advance. Nonetheless, Constantine reached the area of the Milvian Bridge, only 5 kilometres from Rome, on October 27th. The sources we have for the battle are frustratingly brief, even though they are quite numerous. They're also contradictory and from a variety of different historical traditions, each of which takes a different view of the battle. This in itself is interesting, but it makes diving into depth on the battle difficult. Ammianus Marcellinus's Res Gestae does not survive for this period, and Nazarinus's oration specifically on the battle is lost. What survives, therefore, is the anonymous panegyric's writings soon after the battle in 313, but his account is couched in terms of the highest praise for Constantine. The Christian writers, Lactantius, writing in 314 or 315, and Eusebius, also writing in 315, emphasize the role of Christians and their God in Constantine's victory. We also have other pagan historians and orators, Zosimus, Aurelius Victor, and Orator Nazarinus, who offer a different picture again. Nonetheless, it is possible to reconstruct a plausible account by using a combination of these works. Having awaited Constantine's march until October, Maxentius now chose this late moment to leave Rome and face Constantine in open battle. This is in a way inexplicable, and we are told he was drawn out by God, by Christian writers, by a hostile divinity, by pagan writers, or by the interpretation of an oracle. It is also possible that he saw an opportunity to destroy Constantine. A combination of these factors is also a possibility. Rome had withstood Galerius's attempts to take it by siege, so Maxentius should have been safe to stay there and see out Constantine's siege. He had been unable to take Verona by siege earlier in the year. Instead, Maxentius marched his army out to meet Constantine at the Milvian Bridge. According to the anonymous panegyrist, Maxentius selected the battlefield despite the fact it had several disadvantages. His men would fight with the river at their backs, so repositioning and retreat were nigh on impossible. The choice of the battlefield close to the Milvian Bridge has perplexed historians. At first glance it would seem to be a noose around Maxentius's neck. One ancient source, Aurelius Victor, does not even mention it. He claims the battle was fought at Saxarubra, meaning Red Rocks, modern Prima Porta, the 9th milestone, 14.4 kilometres from Rome, some distance beyond the bridge, although still on the Via Flaminia. He is the only source to mention this as the battle site. All the others name the Milvian Bridge as integral to the battle, and we should trust them. There may have been a good reason Maxentius chose this as his battle site, as we shall see. The Christian orator Lactantius, who had been the tutor to Constantine's son Crispus, wrote his account in Nicomedia in 314 and 15, in his speech on the deaths of the persecutors. Although not an eye-witness, he may have nonetheless had access to official documents regarding the battle. Lactantius's speech is perhaps an unusual source for a battle, but he was an exact contemporary, and he provides some remarkable details. He tells us that Maxentius stayed in Rome because soothsayers foretold he would die if he left. He therefore conducted military operations through able generals. Why he then changed his mind and left the city is unclear, but there were other oracles to come. What is more, Maxentius's forces exceeded Constantine's, containing his own army, Severus's, and new recruits from Italy and Mauritania. Lactantius is the only source to suggest that Maxentius was victorious, at least partially, before Constantine approached Rome. They fought, and troops of Maxentius prevailed. Lactantius maintains that Maxentius's troops still held the advantage despite Constantine's victories up to that point. Perhaps Maxentius's forces had achieved a success against Constantine, delaying his advance. This would be something the panegyrics would understandably not record, and it also explains perhaps why Maxentius would leave the security of the city confident of victory. Next, however, Lactantius tells us Constantine approached Rome and camped opposite to the Milvian Bridge. There we are told of the dream whereby he was told to look for or draw the heavenly sign on his men's shields, the Chi Rho. This is extremely unlikely, but has taken root in popular myth about Constantine. The armies met, although Maxentius was not with his army, according to Lactantius, and fought with the utmost exertions of valour and firmly maintained their ground. At Rome, in Lactantius's version, there was a tumult where Maxentius was reviled, again unlikely, but he was inspired to demand that the Sibylline books be searched, and the prophecy that on the same day the enemy of the Romans should perish. Receiving this oracle, Maxentius rushed to join his army. This picture is dramatic but unlikely. The oracle was probably the one he received earlier, and he was already with the army. This second oracle is also recorded in the 6th century pagan historian Zosimus. He tells us that Maxentius, consulting the Sibylline books, was told that anyone harming the Romans would die a horrible death. Maxentius interpreted this to mean that since he was defending Rome, Constantine was intending to harm it. Maxentius therefore left Rome and headed to the battlefield. The battle would also be fought on the 6th anniversary of Maxentius's usurpation in 306, October 28th. Lactantius's next comment is vital in this reconstruction. The bridge in his rear was broken down. This can tie in with the stratagem in Zosimus, and there is no need for a bridge of boats. However, the summation of the battle is brief. The forces of Maxentius were routed. He fled towards the broken bridge, but the multitude pressing on him, he was driven headlong into the Tiber. We should ask, if the bridge was broken, someone in Maxentius's entourage would have known, and so why would they head back to it, unless it was part of Maxentius's ruse? Although he is the latest source for the battle, Zosimus used contemporary and close to contemporary sources which do not themselves survive. He can therefore be used to add useful detail, even though he seems at first to be at major odds with our other earlier sources. Zosimus tells us, for instance, that Constantine had 90,000 infantry from Britain, Gaul, and Germany, and 8,000 cavalry. Maxentius, 80,000 Italians and Tyrrhenians, 40,000 Carthaginians, he means men from North Africa, and Sicilians, in total 170,000 infantry and 18,000 cavalry. These numbers are too large, although the proportions may be of use. The same proportion of cavalry to infantry, between 10 and 12%, gives us 4,900 cavalry for Constantine and 9,500 for Maxentius, using the smaller troop totals in the anonymous panegyric. Another contemporary rhetorician, Nazarinus, wrote 2 speeches on the battle in 321. The first, and probably most detailed, is lost, but the second gives useful detail nonetheless. Nazarinus tells us that Maxentius outnumbered Constantine, and that his forces were so vast, a multitude which stretched as far as the eye could see, that they were drawn up in a formation as deep as it was wide, near the Tiber, with the river actually lapping at the heels of the last ranks, which accords with Lactantius. He tells us that the army of Maxentius also had auxiliaries. Frustratingly, he passes over Constantine's battle array, since he has told us of it in his previous lost speech, delivered the day before. Nazarinus does, however, tell us that Constantine was in the place of most difficulty, perhaps with the cavalry, as he was earlier in the north, leading by example. The bridge itself seems to have been a central part of Maxentius's battle plan, although this is a factor missing in several ancient accounts. Nazarinus criticizes the choice of the battlefield because it cut off Maxentius's escape and made dying a necessity, as he had no hope of winning. This fatalist version is not necessary. If Maxentius had made it back to Rome, he could have withstood a siege there. Constantine had been unable to take Verona by siege. Lactantius tells us that after Maxentius had crossed the bridge on his way to battle, it was cut down behind him. Stranding himself on the northern bank of the Tiber might seem senseless. His own return was blocked. But if he was defeated, Constantine too could not continue his advance, and Maxentius could escape to withstand a siege. However, Lactantius also suggests that the bridge was taken down within sight of the army. At sight of that the battle grew hotter, so that they would know they had to fight. The bishop of Caesarea, Eusebius, talks not of the bridge itself, but of a bridge of boats, even claiming Constantine told him of this detail himself. Which battle Constantine was talking of is not altogether clear, however. Eusebius wrote 2 accounts of the battle. The first, probably written in 315, is his ecclesiastical history, and was also the basis of a much later version in his Life of Constantine. He tells us that Constantine was aided by God and won 3 victories before advancing to the Milvian Bridge. His account does give us some useful detail, but he also adds confusion. Eusebius tells us that Maxentius had praetorian guardsmen and regular soldiers, but that he used a bridge of boats to cross the river, perhaps suggesting the Milvian Bridge itself was already demolished. He tells us that Maxentius retreated, turning his back on the God-sent power that was with Constantine, and headed back to the bridge of boats, surrounded by his bodyguards. The bridge of boats subsequently collapsed, and the men drowned, including Maxentius. Other accounts, however, complicate this use of the bridge and make it part of a cunning ruse on the part of Maxentius to try and trap and destroy Constantine. The bridge of boats is also mentioned in Eusebius's Life of Constantine, implying it was part of a stratagem to trap Constantine while he was pursuing and apparently fleeing Maxentius. This implies that Maxentius always intended to retreat from the battlefield in apparent flight, a factor few have considered in reconstructing the battle. Aurelius Victor has Maxentius defeated at Saxarubra, his battle lie cut to pieces, and retreating to the Milvian Bridge. There he was caught in his own ambush, a manoeuvre he had prepared for Constantine. This might tie in with the bridge of boats collapsing in Eusebius. The anonymous Epitome de Caesaribus tells us Maxentius drowned from his collapsing bridge en route to face Constantine, not fleeing from battle with him. Zosimus too talks of a bridge built across the Tiber as a trap to catch a pursuing Constantine, and goes into some detail on how the trap would be sprung. According to Zosimus, Maxentius set a bridge over the Tiber, not all in one piece, from one bank to the other, but divided into 2 parts, so that in the middle of the river the ends of each half of the bridge were joined together with iron rivets, which could be withdrawn when one wished to destroy the bridge. He instructed the workmen, as soon as they saw Constantine's army on the join of the bridge, to withdraw the rivets, destroying the crossing, and drop everyone standing on it into the river. This was Maxentius's scheme. Zosimus's account actually makes the most sense of the battle and removes the need to have both the bridge and a bridge of boats, combining the available evidence of the sources so that Maxentius modified the Milvian Bridge itself rather than dismantle it and then constructed a second bridge of boats, can explain all the aspects of the battle where the bridge is concerned. These modifications could also have been interpreted as the demolition of the bridge seen in Lactantius. Maxentius's army therefore deployed to face Constantine's on the northern bank of the Tiber across the Milvian Bridge. Zosimus tells us that the battlefield was a broad plain suitable for cavalry. I've followed Ross Cowan in his identification of the field as the plain beyond the Tor di Quinto, close to the bridge. Maxentius had almost twice as many cavalry as Constantine and almost 3 times as many infantry. Constantine's advantage was that his army had marched from victory to victory, and were confident in their own fortune and in their commander, who once again took up position in the front ranks where danger would be closest. This may have been a factor Maxentius was relying on. Zosimus's details provide the best reconstruction of the battle. Constantine sent in his horse, which attacked and routed the opposing cavalry. Nazarinus tells us Constantine was the first to fall on the enemy line, implying a cavalry charge, and he alone broke into the enemy ranks, exaggerating, perhaps. According to Zosimus, the infantry were then given the signal, and they too attacked. A fierce battle ensued. Lactantius claims that both sides formed their battle lines and fought to a standstill, neither side giving ground. Many were killed, but Maxentius's guard, cavalry, stood firm. When they fled, however, the army gave way, Maxentius at their head. According to the anonymous panegyrist, however, Maxentius's army fled at the first charge of Constantine's army. He does also record that only 1 unit of Maxentius's soldiers stood their ground. This apparent headlong fight was, no doubt, part of Maxentius's plan. Constantine was meant to pursue and be destroyed by doing so. Maxentius knew that Constantine would lead the way, as he had in the campaign thus far, and this made him vulnerable. Unfortunately, Maxentius's plan came completely unstuck. Zosimus tells us that the timbers of the modified bridge could not hold the weight of the retreating cavalry and gave way, drowning Maxentius and his bodyguard. It may also have been that the trap was sprung too early, and Maxentius and his men plunged into the Tiber rather than the pursuing Constantinians. Aurelius Victor simply tells us Maxentius was caught in the trap he had laid for Constantine. According to the anonymous panegyrist, the retreat across a single narrow bridge meant that Maxentian forces could be cut down on the northern bank of the river as they crowded the bridge trying to cross. Several jumped into the river and attempted to swim across. Several accounts talk of the defeated, retreating Maxentians being trapped, crowding about the bridge. If the army had seen the bridge being demolished, however, they would surely not have headed back towards it. If, however, it was meant to be brought down at the time of Maxentius's choosing, and the retreating men were all intended to lure Constantine onto the bridge, their heading towards it makes most sense. So too does the fact that they were trapped when it collapsed early and stranded them on the wrong side of the river. This would explain the milling crowds of the retreat. They might not have known the bridge had collapsed early, and also why men then swam to cross the river rather than making a direct route for the closest part of the river. In the anonymous panegyric, Maxentius himself attempted to ford the river on his horse, but he drowned in the attempt. Nazarinus's description is the most evocative. He describes the banks of the Tiber as an unbroken line of slaughter, and describes the Tiber as filled with the bodies as the enemy, Maxentius, shamefully fled and was drowned. Nazarinus, too, however, seems not to have recognized Maxentius's apparent flight as part of his ill-fated battle plan. In Lactantius, Maxentius joined the battle after the fighting had already started, and it was the hand of God on the battle line which caused the Maxentians to flee, but still towards the bridge. Maxentius fled too and was drowned crossing the river. A decisive charge at some later point in the battle, rather than the initial charge in the anonymous panegyric, is much more likely, and this seems to support the idea that Maxentius's flight was premeditated. Christian writers emphasized the supposed Christian element to the battle. that before the battle, according to Lactantius, Constantine dreamed that he should look for, or draw, the heavenly sign of God on his soldiers' shields. This would be interpreted as the Chi Rho of Christian soldiers, or that he had a vision of the cross and subsequently created the Chi Rho battle standard, the Labarum. This was Eusebius's version of the vision in the life of Constantine. These events are highly unlikely. In an empire which was still officially pagan, Christian soldiers would not have claimed responsibility for Constantine's victory in any tangible or official way. The vast majority of Constantine's army in 312 would have been pagan, and to attempt to lessen their responsibility for the victory would have been folly, not to mention dangerous. After the death of Constantine and his deathbed baptism to Christianity in 337, however, Christians could claim responsibility for all manner of historical occurrences. In Lactantius and Eusebius, we see that Christian writers could not agree on how this supposed Christian influence manifested itself. The biggest issue with Eusebius's account, however, is that he has Constantine already a Christian himself in 312, which he was not. Constantine's immediate reward for victory at the Milvian Bridge was Rome itself. Possessing it, and the death of Maxentius in the battle, made Constantine undisputed emperor of Rome and the Western Roman Empire. In the east, however, Licinius was still Augustus, and Constantine faced a further 12 years of civil war to reunite the empire under his singular rule. At the same time as the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, Licinius was warring with Maximinus in the east. The latter was defeated in battle in 313 and committed suicide. This left only Licinius and Constantine, who continued to fight until Constantine won a final victory at the Battle of Chrysopolis in 324, fought on the outskirts of Byzantium, now a suburb of Istanbul. Defeating Licinius and becoming sole emperor, Constantine established a new imperial dynasty and earned the epithet the Great, the only Roman emperor to do so. Well, thank you once again, Murray, for writing that episode for us. If you would like to write an episode for us or have an idea for an episode for us to do, then just drop us a line, info@thehistorynetwork.org. And please do become a patron of the podcast, patreon.com/The History Network. Thank you once again to all our patrons who make this podcast possible. Thanks again for listening. You've been listening to the historynetwork.org podcast, written by Murray Darm, read by Nick Barker.